Hello and welcome to another episode of Wednesdays with WV. On this episode, which is episode number 57, I've got a guest who's seen it all. First as a player, then as an administrator, then as a broadcaster, then, of course, as a teacher. You name it, she's done it. And as of now, she's busy calling the games all over the world, be it the men's category or the women's category. And she's absolutely brilliant behind the mic as well. Is none other than Melanie Jones. Of course, Melanie Jones is no stranger to this part of the world, and it's my pleasure to present to you Melanie Jones. Hi, Mel. It's good to have you on the show.
WV, thanks for the invite.
And you've been involved with cricket in many capacities over the years. How do you think women's cricket has evolved over the years?
Oh, look, I think if you asked me probably 10 years ago, I'd be standing on the MCG in front of 86,000 for a T20 Women's World Cup, that these days we've got a Women's Premier League, that players are full-time professionals. I probably would have laughed at you in a sense. So I think the space and time has been fantastic in a lot of ways of just elevating the game, elevating players, the administration of things. I think as great as that is, and we're here, we've got jobs doing it, traveling the world, talking about cricket, which is absolutely brilliant. You still have concerns though about just the bigger picture of the game and people getting left behind in terms of nations and players and things like that. So I think we're in a pretty critical time at the moment. As great as the shop front window looks, I think there's still quite a bit of work to be done.
You're talking about the concerns. Test cricket is gradually making a comeback of sorts. Do you think it can be sustained in the long run?
Yeah, look, it's a tricky one. I think it can be sustained, but it needs it to be a priority for people at the leadership table, at the decision-making table, and they are sort of quite a broad spectrum of people, aren't they? And I think you have your cricket tragics and lovers at that decision-making table who've either played the game for a long time and know and see and respect what Test match cricket can do for the game, for men's and women's. And then you've probably got some new people at the table that are sort of marketing and strategists and number crunchers at the table as well, going, well, I don't think it's probably not going to help us in this area here, kind of thing. So those two sort of competing forces, I think, will be probably the biggest challenge, as to say whether it can or will. And I suppose that's the two different parts, isn't it? I think there's the two test matches we've seen recently in India, the Ashes test match at Trent Bridge. There was viewership, people was tuning in to watch. There was people at grounds. There was some fantastic cricket being played. So there's a lot of positives around it, and I think that the players' voice from both sides, men's and women's, will probably play a pretty critical role in where it goes to from here.
While we're on the topic of Test cricket, you had a cracker of a debut, century on debut. Just talk us through it.
We're going back now, aren't we? I'm going to have to delve into the depths of my memory there a little bit. Look, I think, I'd already played a series against Pakistan at home, and then we went to the 97 World Cup in India, which was just one of the most magical career moments. Touring India, winning a World Cup at Eden Gardens in front of a jam-packed house. And then not long after that, 6 months later, managed to get picked for Australia on an Ashes tour of England. And as an Aussie, like any cricketer, you grow up in your nation and you see
Hello,
cricket on TV.
hello. As an England-born Aussie.
Well, yeah, okay. But we're just quickly passing through, that's all. And you're on an Ashes tour, and you're getting a bag of green cap, you're getting a vest with the Australian coat of arms on it. You're in the traditional whites, and you're playing. Back then we actually played a lot of all our club cricket, and domestic cricket was 2-day cricket as well. So it was a red ball. It was all these wonderful things, and it was against England. So there was just so much, just tradition and excitement about just walking out collectively as Australia against England in that kind of format that is actually quite hard to describe. And we're playing some of the greats. Jan Britton was playing for England. She hit runs against us for fun on that tour. There was Charlotte Edwards debuted in a test series, and we saw the start of such a magical career there. And then we had some of the greats in our team as well. I do remember being in the 90s for quite some time, and it was back in the day where there wasn't digital cameras. So it was like the old wide-on film. So my best mate, Julia Price, she actually ran out of film by the time I got there to get the 100 and get the actual moment, because there's no photographers there or anything along those lines. It was quite limited in the media coverage kind of thing. So there was this sigh of relief, I think, from the team when I finally ticked it over.
At what stage did Australia manage to sneak ahead of the other nations? Because at the start of it all, it was evenly spread out. It couldn't be said for certain as to who was the leader of the pack.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I always look back at the strength of Australian cricket, and I, hand on heart, say we had some amazing administrators and women from the game that sort of played it, but also within the administration, so that when the amalgamation between Women's Cricket Australia and Cricket Australia happened, it wasn't just Cricket Australia just consuming the women's game and making all the decisions. So Belinda Clark, who was the captain of Australia, was the CEO of Women's Cricket Australia at the time. And she had some fantastic people around it. Chris Matthews has just resigned as the CEO of the WACA and has been over there for a dozen years and done magnificently well with all the men's and women's programs over there. So just really astute, switched on women who knew the importance of relationships, and then worked really well with James Sutherland in setting up a women's cricket strategy that had a long-term vision of where they wanted the game to go. And probably going back to your first question about the investment in money, they realised that by investing money in a sport and a program that wasn't going to return immediately with money, that was okay, because they mapped it all out and they knew that it would actually make a financial return, and it would also make cricket more accessible and just a bigger sport in Australia, and that certainly panned out.
Yeah, this part of the equation was worked out. Then it came down to fitness, wasn't it, as far as the overall structure is concerned?
Yeah, I'll look for in terms of the playing side of things. Fitness has always been a pretty critical element within the Australian women's setup, and I think that probably stems back to just Australian sport. We had Australian Institute of Sport, which oversaw our program, but oversaw all Australian programs. So you'd either go through Adelaide for cricket or Canberra for a lot of the other sports, swimming and track and all those sorts of things. So there was always a want to have a baseline there just to show that athletes could not only just play the game but could recover, and touring and events could keep coming back, and the travel and all those sorts of things as well. So yeah, fitness has always been a very big part, and most players back then played multiple sports as well. So if you were playing hockey, or you're playing Australian rules football, or you're playing football, soccer, you had to have a pretty good baseline level of fitness.
Your qualification in physical education, how does it help a sports person's fitness?
Yeah, I did. My mum was a teacher. She was a librarian, does not know anything about sport. My dad and his mum also taught at different stages, so I think there was a bit of teaching in the blood. And I was always so passionate about sport. I just sort of, as a kid, just thought that was just the natural sort of progression to go into. Didn't end up, I only taught for a year primary school PE. Those poor kids, I do wonder where they ended up. But I think for me, it just gave a wonderful grounding on understanding. And I've always loved coaching. I've coached junior state teams for Victoria. Alana King was in the under 15 team that I coached way back in the day. What I do love is that relationship with players at any age, but trying to help them on a level that is going to best suit them as well. So not just this blanket, one size fits all kind of approach, and then working with them over, a series of, whether it's weeks or seasons at a club level, and seeing them individually improve, but also help put that individual into the team context as well, and marry that up with all these other individuals around as well. That's, I suppose, one of the beauties of the game of cricket.
Yeah, we've spoken about the operational side of things, the monetary side of things, the teaching side of things. Australia has always had great captains, one after the other, in both the categories, men's and women's. How does that happen?
Yeah. Oh, look, they say in Australia that, the second highest position after the Prime Minister is the Australian men's captain. And I think the way the women are going at the moment, they might have slid it down to number 3, and Elise Healy might be a number 2. So it's, yeah, look, I think from an Australian perspective, when you've had just fantastic role models to start with, it's hard to sort of waver from that. So, I go back in the women's game, and you've got the likes of Sharon Treadray and Rayleigh Thompson and Mark Jennings that lead into the recent greats like Belinda Clark, and they were so astute at not just making sure that it was about on-field decisions. It was critical, yes, but it was also the bigger picture of the leadership of the team and of the sport, and knowing that when you sort of sign a contract as a player, it's not just to play. There's a social contract also that you sign, that you're signing up to this sport to take the sport to a better place than when you first started in it as well. So I think that the tactical stuff is just we watched a lot of cricket growing up, like like a lot of people, and then you question the cricket. So club cricket, you play a game, you don't just then leave. You sit down and you chat with your teammates and the opposition about certain parts of the game, and so that then you're constantly always learning and sharing that knowledge as well. And I think Australian captains have been fantastic in that.
I think you anticipated my next question. Meg Lanning as captain. What made her special and what made her different from others?
Fierce competitor to start with, one of the fiercest you'll ever come across, and very there was no blinkers for Meg, so there was a very clear path and things, and that made things very easy for players coming into the team, because it was always very much clarity on the way in which she wanted to lead her team. And that's not to say it was autocratic or anything along those lines. There was certainly scope for players to express themselves to a certain degree. She had a wonderful ability of reading the game and staying ahead of the game and challenging certain moments in the game, just not to let things drift along. And you've got to remember, she was Australia's youngest ever cricket captain, male or female. So she got thrust into this position. And I don't think she really, who would at that age sort of know, your vision or your plan? You're just going along with things. So she started underneath Catherine Fitzpatrick, but it was probably the relationship with Matthew Mott, who had a wealth of experience coming from the men's game into the women's game. It was that partnership, along with Rachel Haynes as the vice captain, that I think showed that leadership piece that assisted Meg as well. So yes, Meg was an outstanding and astute cricket captain and leader, but I think there was certainly a collective approach with it as well.
Yeah, you mentioned that she was obviously a young captain. Was she earmarked for the job, or is it just a case of things happening and falling in place for her?
Yeah, well, she was vice captain at the time to Jodie Fields. She probably was. I mean, you could tell right from the get-go, even when I was playing state cricket with her, like you looked at her and you just went, this kid's next level. She's going places with her own game. And then at that stage, we sort of finished with Karen Rolton as the Australian captain into Alex Blackwell, who had it for a period of time. And sort of, I think there was cast my mind back now, I think there was a bit of a sort of transition phase with sort of senior players moving out. And so I think there was a want to try and find someone that was going to have longevity in the game and could sort of transition that period as well. So I think Meg having the vice captaincy, they thought that Jodie Fields would be in the team probably for another 2, 3, 4 years. And then that would be a nice chance for her to sort of get her feet under the desk and take things nice and easily. But it wasn't to be. Jodie did a horrific hamstring injury, and Meg was in there, and the rest is history.
Australia has obviously been dominating international cricket, but the recent development suggests that the subcontinental teams have started doing well abroad. This is terrific for the game, isn't it?
Oh, it makes my heart sing with joy, WV, because for me, this is the most critical element of any sport. Like we love cricket. And we sit and we can watch it, but I tell you what, you can't watch much cricket if there's no competition, or you're just constantly seeing the same team winning absolutely everything all the time. Now, so for Australian fans, we quite like it, yes. But for a game to flourish and grow, we need every nation being lifted up, and that's the importance for teams like Australia and India at the moment, is to, as much as they want to improve themselves, they need to have an eye on the bigger picture of the sport and lift other sides as well when they can and when it's appropriate. Fantastic to see Pakistan and New Zealand recently doing so well. Bangladesh had the wins over India, which was fantastic. So that's outstanding. What I love about it too is there's such different styles playing the game. And so it's not just this one size fits all. So it's so entertaining just to see just that different points of sort of, two countries who've been brought up on cricket in two different ways, trying to figure out a way of defeating each other on the field. That's exactly what you want to see.
While on the topic of development of cricket, has WBBL complemented the Australian domestic circuit, or is it helped plug the gaps in it?
Yeah, hugely so. So we've had our WNCL, which is our 50 over competition, in place for many a year, and I actually believe that has been the unsung hero for the success of the WBBL, because it's given players the ability for that slightly longer format over the 50 overs to seriously work on their defence, work on their tactical nous, give them time and space to develop. So when the WBBL actually started, we had a reasonably good depth of player coming through who could sort of, play underneath the spotlight reasonably quickly. So the WNCL is still sort of our breeding hub of our cricketers, and then they can come through and sort of flourish a little bit more in the WBBL. The WBBL sort of was more about, in a way, that professionalism of the game, crowds, media, television, broadcast, marketing of the game, all those bits that you didn't have in the WNCL, all of a sudden was right there in your face in the WBBL. And there's some challenges and some ups and downs trying to just sort of get used to that, because it was a bit of a shock to the system, I think, for most of the players and for people in the media as well. But I think they've sort of transversed that quite well. And it's, for mine, when I look at the competitions around the world, it's still the best competition at the moment. And it's one of the reasons why Australia is still doing so well.
You are a member of the Cricket Australia board at perhaps the most challenging of times. How did that gig go for you?
Yeah, that was there's probably a book in that, WV. It was
Surprised.
Earl Eddings, who was the chair at the time, rang me about coming onto the board, and it floored me. I just thought, well, what's he talking about? This is going to be a joke. And then when I realised it wasn't, I went through the process of being nominated by my state, which is Cricket Victoria. And just number one, it was an absolute honour to be able to, be sitting at a boardroom with some really big decisions and to be made, and conversations to be had over a variety of things. I got on December 2019. We had massive bushfires in Australia that summer. So we then had the bushfire relief game. And then we went into the T20 World Cup, Women's World Cup, the home World Cup, where we had the audacious, bold saying of "Fill the G" for the final, which we didn't quite get the world record, but it was amazing to have 86,000, almost 87,000 people there. And then COVID hit, and then all of a sudden, here's me as a new board director trying to get a lay of the land. And then we had 8 meetings a year. I think we had 35 meetings over about a 6-month period, just trying to manage the state of the game and how it affects the states. And all our partners, with no cricket on, lack of money coming in, all those sorts of things. It was probably easily the biggest learning curve I've sort of been on in my professional career. Tiring, stressful, but still exciting at times, and challenging, and something I was really pleased that I did.
The FTP is coming to being in women's cricket now. Do you see it getting busier and busier in the future?
Yeah, I do. And again, I think this is one of the challenges that is that the boards and the ICC need to really focus in on as the points of difference. Yes, cricket's cricket, and we all play the game, and everyone says everything should be the same decisions for the men's and the women's game. I do think we have to have a slightly different lens on the women's game, because of just the way in which nations are just at different points within their development. We've got to try and protect the key domestic tournaments as well. So the Women's Premier League here in India, the WBBL, the 100, so that we don't negate players' opportunities of earning capacity. Now, you say that in the men's, and it's a completely different conversation, isn't it? So I think we need to be, quite brave and supportive in this space to ensure. And New Zealand players and South African players are paid a lot less than the Australian players at the moment. Usman Khawaja mentioned this about Test match cricket. So how do we sort of balance things out a little bit so that we're attracting the best athletes within each country, but once they get there as well, we're supporting them to be the very best players they can and play in all these tournaments as well. So yes, to the FTP, I think it's great. It gives nations a chance to sort of look ahead and plan ahead and get some really strong strategies in place for the development of their sport. But yeah, we're just got to think a little bit broader than that as well.
Where there's a challenge, there's an opportunity. Where there's an opportunity, there can be a challenge. Do you see these leagues that are sprouting up now across the globe posing a threat to international cricket?
For the women's game, no, because we're still quite, I guess, small in our development, and it's still quite controlled. And this is again where I come back and say we shouldn't just do knee-jerk reactions to what the men's have done. I'm seeing so many issues with the amount of leagues within the men's space. I don't think that's healthy. I think I use the term we're slowly eating ourselves as a sport. If there's so much cricket on, the relevance of games becomes, some people are like, oh, there's another game of cricket on. No, so where are our pointy parts of our domestic competitions and World Cups? Where do we get eyeballs focused in? We don't want people going, it's another World Cup on, or there's another bilateral series. So for the women's game, vitally important that we have really strong competitions that are based around sort of strong integrity and a piece where it's not just the big players going around all the time. So competitions like Fair Break and hopefully a Pakistan Women's Super League pops up as well, so that we can start to get more and more players at that next level down into these competitions and playing some really competitive, strong cricket as well.
You call a lot of cricket in the men's category as well. What do you make out of the baseball concept?
You're asking an Aussie.
That's the point.
I don't think. Oh, look, I had an absolute ball in England watching both Ashes, the men's and the women's. But in terms of the men's side of things, I could see crowds coming in and people getting attracted to and tuning into Test match cricket that had never watched it before. So that straight away, I'm like, how great's that? That is fantastic for the non-Test match cricket people to go, oh, how good was that session of play? Like that's exactly what you want with cricket, isn't it? You want to attract new people and try and educate them on the wonderful sport of Test match cricket. I felt for bowlers. I just think if you're gonna hit and hit and hit, there's no rest or relief for those quicks because you're churning through runs and wickets reasonably quickly. And I thought, look, it's a massively brave call by the leadership of England to try and reinvent themselves, not just to be a team that wins some and loses some. They had a horror run leading into baseball, and they turned things around exponentially. So from an English cricket kind of thing, I think it's great. My question is, it's still a certain type of player that they're picking. So you look at someone like Folkes as a wicketkeeper who'd been in the England side and now is out of it because his batting doesn't suit as well, but his keeping is absolutely out of this world kind of thing. So there's pros and cons, as you mentioned before, to absolutely everything. But it got eyes on the sport there for a bit. I don't think it's so overly new. I think, you look back to the Australian team, when Gilchrist and Haydos and all those guys were playing, they were still playing at a very, very good clip, runs per over. It just didn't have a name to it as much. So it suits England at the moment with the players that they've got. Will other nations take it on? I'm not too sure. I don't think there's a right or wrong to it. But it makes things very exciting.
Yeah, we spoke about strategies. We spoke about captains from Australia. Pat Cummins, has he lived up to the expectations or has he exceeded expectations as a strategist?
Probably depends on what side of the fence he sat with Pat Cummins in the first place. Look, you look at the way in which he has led this side since taking it on, and I think the first thing that everyone was just so either critical of the decision or wary of the impact it would be on a fast bowler be a captain. It's sort of, I think it's sort of broken that stereotype a little bit. Here's a guy who, yes, he might have, you know, missed a test here or there and will do so in the future. But these days, I think we all know that captaining a cricket side isn't just about the on-field stuff. There is so much more in terms of setting teams up for tours ahead and the like. And I think he's worked exceptionally well with Andrew McDonald, setting up wins in the World Test Championship into the Ashes, just clean sweep Pakistan recently as well. And then you can go into the white ball cricket as well. And it's a massive job to sort of oversee those two campaigns. I think the big concern is just burnout and making sure that he's as fresh as he possibly can. But his bowling certainly hasn't wavered at all. He's put in some impressive knocks with the bat, and I think he's enjoying himself in the role as well. And he's got good people around him. So I'm super pumped to see him doing well, but also the Australian men's team doing well as well.
Yeah, he's been doing a great job. Now the boys have won the World Cup. It's time for the girls in October, come October, because the World Cup is coming up in Bangladesh. According to you, apart from Australia, who do you see as a serious contender for the World Cup?
Yeah, look, England is always there and thereabouts, and they've got, I think, like we've seen with the WBBL and the WPL, the 100 has given a platform for a lot of the young kids to come through and sort of shine and then get opportunities within the England side. So their depth of options now is increasing. So, you know, you have someone like an Alice Capsey at 16 years old going out onto the packed Lords for the for the 100 and hitting a, you know, half century in next to no time kind of thing. It's almost like Franka Patil coming in and playing for RCB and bowling, then coming out and knocking a few runs around. So you've got these young guns coming through and they've got no fear really, do they? So I think, so for England, they've got a wonderful balance of senior players who've been there, done that. They're led well by Heather Knight, one of the best all-rounders in Nat Sciver-Brunt as well. They've got pace bowlers coming through, wonderful spin bowlers, Dean and Eccleston and the like. So they're exceptionally well-balanced team. India in what you'd think would be sort of similar-ish kind of conditions, coming off a semi-final position in the last T20 World Cup. They're still, as we've seen in this series, trying to probably figure out what their best 11 is, and this is why you play these series, you know, 12 months out of, or 8 months out of World Cups, is to try and hone in and tweak a few things, but get things right as well. And then, I mean, South Africa plays in a World Cup final, and they've had retirements from Dane van Niekerk and Lee and Mignon du Preez and Shabnim Ismail, and post that, but they still make that final. So they've got a competitive spirit that you certainly can't put out of our favour as well. And then there's probably a couple of dark horses. I just mentioned Pakistan. They were brilliant. New Zealand recently, and New Zealand, if you know, a couple of their senior players and youngsters get going as well, they're in the mix too. So I think it's probably going to be one of the tightest T20 World Cups for the women's game we've seen in a while, which is fantastic.
How different is it playing a World Cup in the subcontinent vis-a-vis the SENA countries?
Yeah, look, tournament style players, and I think this is why the Australian men's and women's team have won so many World Cups, is they've almost got that right formula for winning tournament style, and that to do that you need great game plans against each opposition. You're going to be brave enough, even though you might say this is our best 11. You're going to say in T20s, well, that matchup's actually not great, so you can be brave enough to shift those teams. And this is where you come back to, you mentioned fitness before, but there's an element of that play, train, travel in the subcontinent it's draining. And it is for Australia too, when you've got to go Sydney, Perth, Brisbane, and flights and time differences and all those sorts of things. So it's those kinds of elements that teams have to, that's not just something that, you know, you get on the plane and go, right, we've got to manage this. That's 12, 18 months, 2 years out of planning kind of thing. So if teams can plan well for that, get their fixtures, understand where the challenges are going to be in every city with travel and getting to trainings and all those sorts of things, it's all about preparation to win tournaments. You just can't just sort of rock up and hope your best players are going to win your games. It's all making sure that you've ticked off as many boxes as you possibly can prior to.
Given all the experience that you gained in the various roles that you played, would you advocate standardization of pitches at all?
Standardization, as in,
The quality of pitches being uniform more or less across the
um,
world.
yeah, you want to make sure that, well, one, pitches are safe for players, 100%. Um, but I don't want to just see flat track roads where people can just come in and bosh balls around, because the art of cricket, to me, this is why we play on turf, isn't it? Otherwise, we'd be playing on synthetic where we just get a nice even bounce all the time. The art of cricket is the competition between bat and ball, and some of the best games I've seen are from pitches that are actually, that do a bit, that take a bit of turn, that bring spinners into the game, that give a bit of extra pace or a little bit of nibble off the pitch, and it challenges that top order, and then it brings in spin later on. Now, that's what I would love to see. I'd much prefer to see a hard fought competition between bat and ball in a one dayer that's, 270 v 270 than teams coming out and hitting, 400. And it's just a matter of who hits the most fours or sixes. So, but that's the challenge, isn't it? Because pitches in Australia are different to in India and are different to England. And again, that's the beauty of our sport. So don't try and standardise them too much, but just make sure there's a nice even balance between bat and ball.
The beauty of sport is that some always do a lot better than many others across the world. Elise Perry, for instance, 300 appearances for Australia. Fabulous, isn't it?
She never ceases to amaze me. Like, you think you'd be used to, going, oh, Elise Perry, she's done this, and you're like, oh. But it's phenomenal for a lot of reasons, because I look at, so it's Mitali Raj, Charlotte Edwards, and Susie Bates, who have passed 300 already. Charlotte Edwards and Mitali Raj, not really in that professional era of sports, so, which is impressive in itself for the fact that they were sort of semi-professional, but had that longevity of career. But the longevity meant that there was rest periods in between. For someone like Elise Perry, who was a dual athlete to begin with, but she started off as a fast bowler, and that's the impressive thing for me. Just the rigors of that amount of time, training and playing as a fast bowler, but also then being gradually now a top order bat. And if you looked at the kilometres that she would run on a cricket field, patrolling the boundary and diving around and doing all those things, that is just a absolutely phenomenal record. So, and her fitness was pretty much in tune up until she did a hammy in the 2020 World Cup, and then she had a stress fracture and then sort of knee issues. But even the way in which she came back from that, the dedication and to her rehab and knowing what's best for her and doing all the things outside of the program on top of, just to make sure that she can come back and be the best Elise Perry, and more so the best person for the Australian cricket team, is probably next to none.
Your autobiography on the anvil?
Sorry, my autobiography on
the anvil? Do we get to read your story?
Not a chance, unless there's a cure needed for insomnia, maybe. But I can't see myself putting pen to paper anytime soon.
There have been many all-rounders like you been in this sport. There's not a good...
It's a funny one, isn't it? I think most athletes at some stage, or people who are in the media, probably get asked about it. I often think, why would people want to hear my story? But I know that I've probably had a reasonably unique one with growing up in Australia with, different background, with a West Indian dad and an Aussie mum, and pretty much mum being a solo mum, bringing me up as well, and all those things, and then transitioning from cricket into media when, some of the first females, along with Isha Gurun, Anjum Chopra and Lisa Stalaker, and some fantastic women like that. So there is I suppose, a unique story there. Look, I can't see it, but you never say no.
Finally, a word of advice to the aspiring cricketers across the world.
It is one of the most beautiful sports to play when you don't compare yourself. I think comparison is the thief of joy. So just go out there, be you as a cricketer, enjoy your unique ways in which you play the game. Play other sports as well, because other sports will certainly help your cricket and understanding of tactics and all those sorts of things as well. Enjoy watching it, enjoy playing it, enjoy talking about it, because it's a sport for for your lifetime. It's not just a little moment from in your 20s or 30s. It's a sport you can sit down and still be watching when you're old and 80 like me and grey hairs and still get a buzz out of it.
Thanks a lot, Mel. As always, it's been enchanting talking to you, and thanks for your time.
WV, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
There it was, a wealth of experience coming out of that conversation from Melanie Jones, and she's always been articulate. That's stating the obvious, but what is fantastic about Melanie Jones is that she's so clear in the views that she expresses, and she's so balanced. And I'm sure that you people would have enjoyed the conversation. And for those who are joining us for the first time, kindly log on to the handle of Sportstar and catch up with all our episodes that we put out earlier. And for those who've been with us all through from the start, we'd like to thank you once again for your continued support. And please keep your comments coming, because that will give us a very good indication of what it is we need to do in the future as well. So until I catch up with you next time, be good and stay safe.